I had always imagined retirement would mean quiet mornings, coffee on the porch, and tinkering with old cars in the driveway. After 30 years of service, I'd earned a little peace. That morning in Oak Haven Estates started no different. Sun filtering through the blinds, the hum of cicadas building like static, and me elbow deep in restoring the carburetor of a classic Mustang. But peace doesn't last long when the Homeowners Association decides you're their next target. I heard the crunch of footsteps before I saw them. Three men strode up my driveway in matching dark uniforms, their boots clicking against the pavement like they'd rehearsed the entrance. Their leader carried himself with theatrical authority, flashing a shiny badge that caught the sunlight. "Mr. Lawson," he announced, "I'm Captain Reed, HOA Security Enforcement. We need to discuss compliance with community safety protocols." Community safety. That was new. I wiped my hands on a rag, eyeing their polyester uniforms. The seams screamed costume shop, the badges looked laminated, and their posture, an imitation of military bearing without the weight of experience, was all wrong. My years in command taught me to spot fraud faster than a recruit trying to bluff push-ups. These weren't real officers. Before I could call their bluff, she appeared. Eleanor Graves, HOA president. Perfect silver hair, tailored suit, and an aura of entitlement so thick it filled the air like perfume. She stepped from behind my neighbor's hedge as though waiting for her cue. "Mr. Lawson," she said with a lawyer's cadence, polished by years in courtrooms, "thank you for cooperating with our assessment. We've identified troubling patterns in your background that demand review." Her words made my skin prickle. Troubling patterns. She spoke as if she'd just cracked open a classified dossier. And then she did the unthinkable. She mentioned details from my final deployment overseas, including an Article 15 disciplinary note that was sealed tighter than a vault. My pulse hammered in my ears. That information wasn't public. No HOA president should know it. "How did you get that record?" I asked, trying to keep my voice level. She smiled, sharp and cold. "Our background verification is thorough. Neighborhood safety requires it." It wasn't just arrogance. It was a threat. She knew something she shouldn't, and she wanted me to know she had it. The so-called Captain Reed stepped forward with a clipboard covered in logos, due seals, federal crests, all a little too crisp, too clean, like stock images printed on cheap paper. "We'll need proof of firearm storage, registration compliance, and inspection access to your property," he declared. That was the moment I realized this wasn't about lawn heights or mailbox paint. This was about control, about intimidation, and about something much bigger than my garage. I played along. Years of intelligence work taught me patience, the value of letting the enemy reveal their hand. "Fine," I said. "Schedule your inspection. Let's see how far you want to take this." Eleanor's smile deepened. "We'll convene tomorrow at the clubhouse. Consider it your compliance hearing." That night, unease gnawed at me like rust on steel. I wasn't paranoid. I was trained to recognize when pressure wasn't organic. My neighbor, Danny Morales, a former Marine, had been stiff around me lately, eyes darting, shoulders tense, like a man under orders he didn't want to follow. When I pressed him, he mumbled something about keeping his family safe and vanished indoors. It was the kind of fear you only saw when someone held a knife to your throat without drawing blood. The next day, the HOA turned the clubhouse into a parody of justice. Folding chairs lined up like a courtroom gallery. A projector screen stood front and center. And there was Reed, now in a suit, playing the role of hearing officer with the poise of a second-rate stage actor. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "we are here to address concerns about Mr. Lawson's activities and his compliance with community safety standards." Activities. That word again. Eleanor rose like a conductor about to lead a symphony. With a click of her remote, the slideshow began. Charts, fabricated evaluations, even a so-called psychological profile labeling me with territorial aggression disorder and authority resistance tendencies. She painted me as a ticking time bomb, a danger to every family within a mile radius. The room shifted uneasily. Some neighbors nodded, others whispered. And in the back, I spotted Mrs. Green, widow, 70 years old, phone held high as she recorded everything. She'd always said she didn't trust the HOA's obsession with control. And now she was streaming it live to whoever would listen. Reed played judge, asking rehearsed questions. Eleanor paraded witnesses, neighbors who claimed they felt unsafe because I once cleaned a rifle in my garage or skipped an HOA potluck. Each testimony more absurd than the last. Then came the twist. She produced a photo from years ago, my unit in Afghanistan. And there, smiling among the young officers, was Lieutenant Mark Graves, her son. My gut twisted. He'd been brave, reckless, the kind of officer who volunteered for every dangerous mission. He died in my arms after tackling a suicide bomber away from a crowded school. You remember him, don't you? Eleanor's voice cracked like a whip. My son died because of you, and now I'll make sure you never forget it. The room froze. My throat tightened. I wanted to tell her the truth, that Mark chose that mission, that he'd saved children with full knowledge of the cost. But grief doesn't hear truth. It only hears blame. Danny Morales finally broke. He stood, voice shaking. She threatened me, he said, pointing at Eleanor. She found out my wife's immigration paperwork had a gap during renewal. Said she'd call ICE if I didn't help make Lawson look suspicious. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Eleanor's polished mask faltered, if only for a moment. The hearing unraveled fast after that. Neighbors demanded answers. Mrs. Green's livestream chat lit up with thousands of viewers, half outraged, half riveted. Eleanor pressed on, insisting her evidence was airtight. But then, recognition spread like wildfire when one viewer posted Reed's real identity. He wasn't security, wasn't law enforcement. He was a commercial actor from a ridiculous mattress ad that ran on local TV. I couldn't help myself. Where dreams come true, right? I said loudly. The audience erupted in murmurs. Reed's face collapsed, his fake authority shattering like glass. It should have ended there. But Eleanor wasn't done. She leaned close, her voice a dagger meant only for me. You don't understand how deep this goes. I have files, classified files. You and every commander from your unit. When I'm finished, the world will know what you did. That night, the phone rang. A voice on the other end identified herself as Agent Dana Rourke, FBI. Calm, professional, no theatrics. Mr. Lawson, do not comply with their demands. We've been tracking a network selling stolen veteran records. Your HOA president is entangled in it. Agents are en route. The next day, SUVs rolled into Oak Haven Estates, federal jackets flashing. Neighbors who had condemned me 24 hours earlier shrank back as agents hauled Eleanor and Reed away. The investigation unearthed a scheme spanning multiple states, fraudulent compliance fees, property scams, veterans targeted systematically for intimidation. Eleanor had used her grief as a mask, her son's death as fuel for revenge, and beneath it all, a criminal enterprise was thriving. In court, the evidence was damning. Emails, financial trails, stolen personnel files. The judge saw through her anger to the rot underneath. Eleanor was sentenced not to prison, but to restitution, counseling, and mandatory service with veterans groups. For her, that was a worse fate than bars, forced to confront the very people she'd betrayed. For me, the damage was lasting. Some neighbors apologized, others kept their distance, ashamed of how quickly they'd believed a polished slideshow over years of shared trust. I'd fought enemies overseas, but nothing cut deeper than being betrayed in my own neighborhood. And yet, something remarkable grew from the wreckage. The exposure sparked a movement. Veterans banding together, teaching each other how to spot fraudulent authority, how to resist intimidation, dressed as bureaucracy. I found myself at the center, not because I wanted to lead again, but because too many had been left unprotected. 2 years later, the garage where I once rebuilt carburetors became the Lawson Veteran Protection Center. Documents, fake badges, recordings, all displayed to educate others. Families came to learn, veterans came to heal, and neighbors came to understand how fear could be weaponized. Eleanor herself became part of it. Her grief no longer sharpened into vengeance, but softened into service. She spoke to mothers of fallen soldiers, counseled them against turning pain into poison. She never forgave me entirely, but she learned to honor her son in a way that finally matched his sacrifice. The hardest battles aren't fought overseas. They're fought here, in quiet neighborhoods, where fear and grief masquerade as authority. And if there's one thing I learned, it's this. The oath we swear to defend against enemies foreign and domestic doesn't retire when we do. Sometimes the battlefield is your own front lawn. Sometimes the enemy wears a neighbor's smile. And sometimes the only weapon you need is the truth.